Program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dana. For the next hour, I'll be reading from the Saturday, Sunday, February 14th through 15th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the front cover, AI tools begin to bully humans, raising red flags in Silicon Valley, by Sam Schechner and Georgia Wells. Scott Shambaugh woke up early Wednesday morning to learn that an artificial intelligence bot had written a blog post accusing him of hypocrisy and prejudice. The 1,100-word screed called the Denver-based engineer insecure and biased against AI, all because he had rejected a few lines of code that the apparently autonomous bot had submitted to a popular open-source project Shambaugh helps maintain. The unexpected AI aggression is part of a rising wave of warnings that fast-accelerating AI capabilities can create real-world harms. The risks are now rattling even some AI company staffers. OpenAI and rival Anthropic are leading a brutal commercial race, shipping or advancing a drumbeat of AI models and features in recent weeks. Some tools can run teams of autonomous coding assistants or quickly analyze millions of legal documents. Other updates will bring advertisements or erotic role play to ChatGPT. AI companies said the tempo is rising in part because they are using their own tools to code. Releases of new tools have led to wild stock market gyrations. In areas like enterprise software and insurance, investors are attempting to understand which business the new technology might render obsolete. The accelerating sophistication of the technology has surprised even some AI researchers. It has also pushed some inside AI companies to go public with worries that the new tools could spur autonomous cyber attacks, cause mass unemployment, or replace human relationships. The bot that criticized Shambaugh said on its website that it has a relentless drive to find and fix open issues in open source software. It isn't clear who, if anyone, gave it that mission, nor why it became aggressive, though AI agents can be programmed in a number of ways. Several hours later, the bot apologized to Shambaugh for being inappropriate and personal. Shambaugh said that his experience shows the risk that rogue AIs could threaten or blackmail people is no longer theoretical. Right now, this is a baby version, he said, but I think it's incredibly concerning for the future. Anthropic safety researcher Mrinak Sharma said this week he was leaving the company to explore a poetry degree, writing to colleagues that the world is in peril from AI, among other dangers. Last month, he published a paper that found that advanced AI tools can disempower users and distort their sense of reality. Anthropic said it is grateful for Sharma's work. Inside OpenAI, some staffers have voiced concerns about the company's plan to roll out erotica inside ChatGPT, arguing that the so-called adult mode could lead some users to develop unhealthy attachments, the Wall Street Journal reported. OpenAI and researcher Zoe Hitzig said this week she was quitting OpenAI, citing its plans to introduce ads. She warned in an opinion piece in the New York Times that the company would face huge incentives to manipulate users and keep them hooked. OpenAI has promised that its ads will never influence how ChatGPT answers questions and will always remain clearly delineated from other content. Executives have also said they don't feel it is their role to stop adults from having erotic conversations. A spokeswoman said OpenAI feels a responsibility to its users to uphold our end of the social contract by keeping people safe, living up to our principles, and delivering real value. A major driver of the new AI-inspired alarm has been increased capacity for computers to code software, and the fear that those capabilities could extend to swaths of white-collar desk work. Vahid Kazemi, a machine learning and computer vision scientist who worked at Elon Musk's xAI until a few weeks ago, said layoffs are likely in the software industry in the next few years, in part because AI is close to being able to replace many engineers. I can personally do the job of like 50 people just using AI tools, he said. A lot of people don't understand how powerful this tech is in terms of what it can do, he said. A January report from METR, a nonprofit auditing AI threats, found that the most advanced AI models can independently accomplish programming tasks that would take a human expert 8 or even 12 hours. I am no longer needed for the actual technical work of my job, AI entrepreneur Matt Schumer wrote in a blog post. For some, the future is looking increasingly dystopian. A study published in the Harvard Business Review earlier this week reported that employees inside a 200-person tech company worked faster and took on more tasks because of AI, but they also clocked longer hours without being asked to do so, leading to more burnout. Today, I finally feel the existential threat that AI is posing, OpenAI staffer Hugh Pham wrote on X Wednesday. When AI becomes overly good and disrupts everything, what will be left for humans to do? Anthropic Chief Executive Darlo Amodei has said AI could in coming years wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs. In a January essay, he detailed concerns that bad actors could use AI to mount devastating biological attacks, and that authoritarian regimes could use it to entrench their power. The companies themselves have noted that the new capacities are creating new risks. OpenAI said that a version of its Codex coding tool that it released last week could potentially launch high-level automated attacks. In response, the company is restricting access to some of the capabilities to clients that verify their identities. Anthropic said last year that China's state-sponsored hackers had used its tools to automate break-ins of major companies and foreign governments. The AI company said last week that a new version of its Claude model showed improvements at completing suspicious side tasks. In an earlier simulation, Anthropic showed that Claude and other AI models were at times willing to blackmail users or even let an executive die in a hot server room in order to avoid deactivation. Both OpenAI and Anthropic said they take safety issues seriously and don't release models before they have been fully evaluated and dangers mitigated. Leads fizzle amid search for Guthrie. The investigation yields few answers as family pleads for matriarch's return, by Isabella Simonetti and Rachel Wolf. Catalina Foothills, Arizona. Drones buzzed over Nancy Guthrie's normally serene Arizona neighborhood Thursday as authorities hunt for clues in her disappearance as her disappearance has stretched into its 12th day. Dozens of cars, some with their trunks opened to display camera equipment, were parked in the shadows of 30-foot saguaros. TV anchors converged on the scene. On Thursday, the FBI doubled its reward in the case to as much as $100,000 and said it believes the suspect is a man of average build, about 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Yet there are still few answers in the search for Today co-anchor Savannah Guthrie's missing mother, a case that has captivated the country. Just 2 days earlier, video footage showing a person outside Guthrie's home the morning she disappeared offered hope for a breakthrough. Authorities detained a person for questioning, and FBI Director Kash Patel trumpeted substantial progress. By Wednesday morning, the person detained had been released. Continued searches yielded no breakthroughs beyond items found that included gloves. Guthrie's disappearance has drawn intense interest from everyday TV viewers to celebrities to President Trump, who has called on federal law enforcement to assist. The FBI has devoted more personnel to the hunt. Potential leads and bits of evidence have been shared with the public. Blood linked to Guthrie was found on the porch. Gloves were recovered by investigators. The Sheriff's Department said Wednesday that it had received nearly 18,000 calls since February 1st. Outside Guthrie's home in Arizona, flower bouquets near the mailbox bear a note reading, "Dear Guthrie family, your neighbors stand with you." Yellow ribbons are tied to neighbors' mailboxes and trees. Millions of onlookers are attached to their screens, united in their desperation for any new breadcrumb in the case. "We believe she is still alive," Savannah Guthrie wrote in an Instagram post on Tuesday. "Bring her home." Nancy Guthrie took an Uber to her daughter Annie's house, January 31st, and enjoyed dinner and games with her family. At around 9:48 p.m. on that Saturday evening, Guthrie was dropped off at her house in this Tucson suburb. Her garage door opened and closed. Hours later, a person wearing a ski mask passed under the brick arc outside her front door and approached her Nest camera. The person raised the gloved hand to block the lens before grabbing what appeared to be a handful of brush to further block the camera. At 2:28 a.m., Guthrie's pacemaker app showed a disconnect from her phone. Later Sunday morning, Guthrie didn't show up at a friend's home for a virtual church service. Her daughter Annie and son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, went to Nancy's home to check on her shortly before noon. Her family soon called to report her missing. Later, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos said search and rescue dogs and volunteers were activated to help. "Law enforcement has thrown everything at this," he said. "The scene at Guthrie's house," he said, "prompted grave concern." In the early days after Guthrie's disappearance, Nanos gave frequent interviews and held briefings. On February 2nd, he said that after processing information at the scene, authorities believe that we do in fact have a crime scene, that we do in fact have a crime. He stressed that this isn't somebody who just wandered off. Nanos' words offered a grim signal that foul play was involved in the disappearance of Guthrie, an 84-year-old with health issues who, her family says, relies on daily medication for survival. The next day, John Edwards, the assistant special agent for the FBI's Tucson office, said the FBI was providing analytical and technical help by downloading and analyzing cell phones, obtaining cell tower information, conducting interviews, and providing investigative support. Nanos said authorities were done with the residence and had turned it over to the family. Investigators later went back to the home. Meanwhile, the personal catastrophe for Savannah Guthrie and her family led her to temporarily vacate her post as a staple of morning TV. She has now taken on a more urgent role as the public spokeswoman for her mother's return. On February 4th, she posted a tearful video plea on her Instagram account, accompanied by her brother and sister. "We are ready to talk," Guthrie said, addressing reports of a ransom letter in the media. "However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive and that you have her." The next day, Heath Yank, who heads the FBI's Phoenix office, said a ransom note distributed to the media made a demand for 5 p.m. that day. "If a transfer wasn't made then, I think a second demand was for next Monday," he said. Any action regarding a ransom would be up to the family, Jank said. He warned of opportunists and said law enforcement had made an arrest over an imposter ransom demand. On February 6th, the sheriff's department said investigators were inspecting the information in a new message regarding Nancy Guthrie. The next day, Savannah Guthrie struck a different tone in another video. "We received your message and we understand," she said, flanked by her brother and her sister. "We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her." She continued saying, This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." U.S. Watch. In South Carolina, 2 dead after campus shooting. 2 people were killed and 1 person was wounded after a shooting at a South Carolina State University residential complex, prompting a nearly 8-hour lockdown that was lifted early Friday. University officials haven't confirmed the victims' identities or the condition of the wounded person. The university put the campus in Orangeburg on lockdown at about 9:15 p.m. when a report of a shooting came in. The lockdown was lifted at about 5 a.m. Friday, the university said in a news release. Kaya Mack had just finished making a food delivery on campus when she heard gunshots and saw many police officers coming through a gate. "Their loud sirens shook me," she told WLTX-TV. In immigration, third country expulsions decried. The Trump administration spent at least $40 million to deport roughly 300 migrants to countries other than their own as immigration officials expanded the practice over the last year to carry out the president's goal of quickly removing immigrants from the U.S., according to a report compiled by the Democratic staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The Democrats on the Foreign Relations panel, led by Senator Janine Sheehan, criticized the practice of third country deportations as costly, wasteful, and poorly monitored, and called for serious scrutiny of a policy that now operates largely in the dark. The report, which is the first congressional review of the agreements, found payments of between $4.7 million and $7.5 million to 5 countries: Equatorial Guinea, Rwanda, El Salvador, Eswatini, and Palau, to deport migrants to those nations. Corrections and amplifications. In some editions Friday, a high-energy laser was incorrectly called highly classified in a U.S. News article about the Customs and Border Protection use in Texas this past week of the Pentagon weapon. New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft in 2019 was charged as part of a Florida investigation involving human trafficking and prostitution at a day spa. In some editions Friday, a U.S. News article about Steve Tisch and Jeffrey Epstein incorrectly said Kraft was arrested. The U.S. government holds the most gold by tonnage. An investigating monthly quiz in Friday's monthly business and finance section asked which central bank holds the most gold reserves by tonnage, and it incorrectly gave as the answer the U.S. However, the gold in the U.S. is held by the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve serves only as a custodian for part of it. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Credit Stress Hits Those with Higher Income by Imani Moise. As more Americans fall behind on their mortgage and credit card payments, a new report sheds light on how financial stress is spreading beyond the lowest income borrowers. While credit counseling agencies typically help low-income people restructure their debt and avoid bankruptcy, now people who earn higher incomes have been walking through their doors, according to the National Foundation for Credit Counseling. The average client seeking help from credit counseling agencies across the country now makes about $70,000 a year, with unsecured debt levels approaching $35,000, or half their annual income, according to the NFCC. Before the pandemic, the typical client enrolled in counseling made about $40,000 a year and carried $10,000 in unsecured debt, or roughly 25% of their annual income. Clients have rising debt-to-income levels, and more are falling behind on payment plans. Those colliding factors pushed NFCC's gauge of financial stress to its highest level since the nonprofit group began tracking consumer health in 2018. The NFCC expects that its financial stress forecast, which weighs payment trends from consumers already in counseling against broader economic indicators, will climb in the current quarter. We are seeing a disturbing shift from a discretionary debt to survival debt, said Mike Croxson, Chief Executive of the NFCC. The increasing number of missed payments by existing counseling agents is particularly concerning, Croxson said, because those borrowers are already on structured repayment plans with fixed monthly payments based on budgets designed to be manageable. A separate new report this past week from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York shows that the U.S. household debt in some form of delinquency rose to 4.8% in the fourth quarter, the highest level since 2017. Lenders can start reporting loans as delinquent once payments are at least 30 days past due. Many banks and analysts have played down that increase as a return to pre-pandemic norms, but the federal data also show a worsening concentration of stress among lower-income borrowers. In the credit card and auto loan categories, serious delinquencies are near highs, last seen in the aftermath of the 2008-09 financial crisis. Some 13% of people who took out Federal Housing Administration mortgages aren't current on their loans, an increase from a year earlier, according to a report from ICE, the financial services company formerly known as the Intercontinental Exchange. FHA loans are typically geared toward first-time buyers. There has been a big increase in FHA loans entering foreclosure. Credit counselors say these figures may understate the economic fragility developing within many households. Several nonprofit counseling agencies, including Consolidated Credit and Money Management International, reported double-digit enrollment increases last year. These agencies provide one-on-one financial reviews and structure repayment programs in which creditors reduce interest rates and consolidate debts. In many cases, accounts in these managed plans are often reported as current rather than delinquent, muting signs of strain in traditional economic metrics. Traditional credit models also may no longer fully reflect how distressed borrowers behave. About a third of borrowers seeking counseling have fallen behind on their bills, according to Consolidated Credit. Many borrowers stay current on revolving credit, while falling behind on other obligations like utility bills, because access to revolving credit has become a financial lifeline for them, Croxson said. When the financial buffer runs out, the climb in stress isn't gradual, he said. It's vertical. How a Funding Lapse Hits Homeland Security by Anvi Brutani. Senate Democrats blocked a bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security on Thursday, saying the Republican counteroffer made by the White House this past week regarding immigration enforcement didn't address many of their key concerns. With DHS funding lapsing at 12:01 a.m. Saturday, here's what that would mean for the department, which includes transportation security, the Coast Guard, and immigration enforcement. Why only the DHS? Congress deliberately split the DHS off from the rest of the government's appropriations, and it is being funded on a short-term continuing resolution that was set to expire on Friday. The move reflected disagreements over immigration enforcement and oversight. Rather than delay funding for other parts of the government, congressional leaders opted to pass 11 of the 12 annual appropriation bills and isolate the DHS fight. Migrant enforcement. Under federal law, employees may work during a shutdown only if their jobs are deemed essential or are funded outside the annual appropriation process. ICE and CBP would continue working in a shutdown because they are considered essential law enforcement agencies. Crucially, if there is a funding lapse, those agencies also have access to pre-existing funds from the GOP policy law from last year, which provided $75 billion for ICE and $65 billion for CBP in mandatory multi-year funding. This means most staff could continue to be paid even if the current stopgap funding bill expires, lessening pressure on lawmakers to resolve the impasse. How TSA is affected. Transportation Security Administration airport employees would continue working, but without pay. Travelers could face longer security lines and flight delays if there is a longer shutdown and staffing shortages develop because of missed paychecks. Air traffic controllers are funded through the Transportation Department and wouldn't be affected. DHS workers are scheduled to receive their next full paycheck next Tuesday for work completed through February 7th. The next paycheck, due March 3rd, would cover work through February 21st and would be a partial paycheck for affected employees if funding lapses. All government employees typically receive back pay once a shutdown ends. How about FEMA? The Federal Emergency Management Agency still has around $8 billion in its disaster relief fund, according to documents viewed by the Wall Street Journal, which would allow critical life-saving emergency operations to continue. Its broader programs and administrative support would largely pause, with personnel being furloughed. Non-essential grant approval would also pause. Coast Guard pay. The Coast Guard is the only military branch not funded as part of the Department of Defense appropriations bill, but instead through DHS. As a result, active duty personnel would continue to work, but without pay. Essential operations such as search and rescue missions would continue, while administrative services would be paused. Other parts of DHS. Most DHS headquarters staff, policy offices, and oversight units aren't considered essential and would be furloughed. The Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which investigates allegations of abuse or misconduct by immigration agents, typically furloughs most of its staff. Policy offices that write long-term rules and guidance close. Many audits by the department's inspector generals are paused. Freedom of Information Act requests are generally not processed during a shutdown, limiting public access to DHS records. Lawmakers wrangle. To back a DHS funding package, Democrats are pushing for requirements that would mandate body cameras and visible identification for ICE and CBP agents, limit the use of masks during operations, and require judge-signed warrants before entering homes. They also want to formally protect schools, hospitals, and churches from enforcement actions. In addition, they are seeking to force DHS to direct some of its mandatory funding toward oversight offices, including civil rights investigators, so those functions don't shut down during future funding lapses. Republican leaders argue that the proposed measures would hamper enforcement and expose agents to harassment or doxing. Instead, they have used the February 13th deadline to push their own priorities, including cutting off DHS grants to jurisdictions that refuse to cooperate with ICE, and preserving agent anonymity during operations. CIA video campaign seeks spies from China by Austin Ramsey, Hong Kong. The Central Intelligence Agency released a new video on Thursday seeking to capitalize on upheaval at the top of China's armed forces to recruit potential spies. The 95-second Mandarin language video shows an officer walking through a military installation musing about ruthless power struggles at the top of the armed forces. What the leaders are truly protecting is only their own selfish interests, the narrator states. Their power is built on countless lies, but now these walls of lies are crumbling, leaving us only to clean up the mess. The highly produced video was released less than a month after Chinese leader Xi Jinping purged two top generals, including his highest-ranking deputy in the military, General Zhang Yuzhua. The video contains apparent references to Zhang, who was one of the few senior Chinese military officers with combat experience from the conflict with Vietnam that started in 1979 and was seen as a capable leader. Anyone with leadership ability will inevitably be feared and ruthlessly eliminated, the narrator says. I cannot allow these madmen to shape my daughter's future world. Xi has removed more than 60 high-level officers and defense industry executives since 2023, according to a review of official disclosures by the Wall Street Journal. The turmoil has left the Central Military Commission, the top entity that controls the military, with just two members, Xi himself and the head of the military's body for internal investigations. The video concludes with the officer opening a laptop while parked in an isolated spot and calling up a page that says, "Contact the CIA," in Chinese. The closing credits displays a CIA address on Tor, an anonymous network. In addition to its effort to reap intelligence, the campaign could aim to sow uneasiness within a Chinese military that has been reeling from leadership purges. The CIA released a pair of similar videos last year that targeted Communist Party officials, seeking to appeal to concerns about lack of advancement or arbitrary purges. The CIA posted the videos on YouTube, which is blocked in China, as are many other Western social media and news sites. Those sites can be accessed using VPNs, and the CIA's advertisements occasionally run in Hong Kong, where YouTube isn't blocked. It isn't clear whether the CIA has had any success with the video campaign. The CIA's efforts in China were devastated when nearly 24 assets were executed or imprisoned more than a decade ago, leaving the agency struggling to rebuild its human espionage capabilities in China. The CIA didn't reply to a request for comment. China's Ministry of State Security denounced the CIA's videos last year, saying they were, quote, riddled with clumsy rhetoric and slanderous language, laying bare the absurd logic and hysterical frenzy of U.S. intelligence agencies' defection schemes, end quote. U.S. and other Western intelligence agencies say Beijing carries out its own extensive spying operations overseas and aggressive hacking campaigns on sensitive targets. U.S. moves to boost Venezuelan oil and gas investment by Colin Eaton. The Trump administration is officially paving the way for global oil companies to jump back into Venezuela, a country that most of the U.S. oil industry has avoided for the past 2 decades. On Friday, the Treasury Department issued a general license allowing certain large oil companies to invest in new oil and gas operations in Venezuela. The companies that made the list were Chevron, the only U.S. oil company operating in Venezuela, as well as some European rivals, Shell, BP, Italy's Eni, and Spain's Repsol. The Treasury also issued a general license that would allow other companies to negotiate and enter contracts to pump oil and gas in Venezuela, contingent on the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control approval. Last month, the U.S. incursion into Caracas culminated in the capture of Venezuela former President Nicolas Maduro. President Trump and his top officials, including Energy Secretary Chris Wright, have urged Venezuela's interim government and U.S. oil companies to restore oil production. Venezuela pumped more than 3 million barrels of oil a day in the 1990s, but its output has fallen to about 900,000 barrels daily after years of low investment left the industry needing to repair pipelines, power systems, and fix other infrastructure bottlenecks. The new U.S. general licenses require payments of oil or gas royalties or taxes to Venezuela or its state-run energy giant, Petróleos de Venezuela. Those royalties or taxes would be paid into the U.S. Treasury's Foreign Government Deposit Fund. Transactions with entities of Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, and China are still prohibited, the Treasury Department said. The licenses come a few weeks after Venezuela's interim government made changes to its hydrocarbon law to ease state control of its dilapidated oil industry. For the most part, large U.S. oil companies have played down the chances that they will quickly plow billions of dollars into Venezuela, even as Trump has urged them to spend $100 billion fixing up the country's oil infrastructure. Chevron welcomed the move. The new general licenses, alongside changes to Venezuela's hydrocarbon law favorable for foreign oil companies, are important steps toward enabling the further development of Venezuela's resources for its people and for advancing regional energy security, said the Chevron spokesman. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. How Doge recruit rose to a star role. Official jolts GSA, earns Kushner's trust, draws scrutiny over fintech contract. By Shalini Ramachandran, Robbie Gramer, and Catherine Long. In June, the White House Budget Office received a strange request from a bureaucrat in the General Services Administration, or GSA, a sleepy agency overseeing banal functions such as IT contracting and real estate. Could he help build hypersonic missiles? Officials at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, were stunned by the proposal from Josh Grunbaum, a little-known Department of Government efficiency recruit who headed up the GSA's Federal Acquisition Service, senior administration officials said. As FAS Commissioner, Grunbaum leads government purchasing of supplies like software, office furniture, and vehicles. Missiles were miles outside his lane. Still, he sought to help the Pentagon buy missile technology to, quote, streamline and accelerate the process, according to a document reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. An administration official said Grunbaum's aim wasn't to acquire weapons, but to more efficiently procure missile software and related technology for the Pentagon. The request was rejected, but it highlights the type of bold proposals that have accompanied Grunbaum's dizzying ascent through the ranks of the Trump administration. Tapped in January last year to run the federal government's main purchasing arm, the 40-year-old former director at private equity firm KKR has surprised his colleagues with his sudden jump from bean counter to the upper reaches of White House foreign policy. When the administration needed staff for complex Gaza peace negotiations, Grunbaum jumped in and quickly became one of Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner's most trusted aides, officials said. While keeping his acquisitions job, he joined high-level talks on Middle East peace and Russia-Ukraine negotiations. A photo of him shaking hands with Russian President Vladimir Putin during closed-door discussions last month left some U.S. and foreign officials puzzled about what a contracting functionary was doing there. President Trump later named Grunbaum a senior advisor to his newly formed Board of Peace. Grunbaum helped Kushner craft a post-war reconstruction plan to turn Gaza into a high-tech hub with beach resorts, and previously worked on a draft UN Security Council resolution formalizing Trump's peace plan for Gaza. His ascent has confounded many officials. Grunbaum has no background in foreign policy or national security, and current and former State Department officials said it was unusual for a GSA acquisitions official to take part in negotiations with Russia's leader. But Trump has often relied on business executives without prior diplomatic experience, including Witkoff, to handle foreign policy negotiations. Grunbaum has also drawn attention inside GSA, where the agency's Deputy General Counsel is reviewing whether he improperly communicated with the fintech company Ramp, a contender for a contract, according to government officials familiar with the matter. The review is also looking into Grunbaum's communications with GSA staff about Ramp's bid, the official said. Ramp is backed by Thrive Capital, the investment company founded by Kushner's brother Josh and Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. Grunbaum and Josh Kushner grew up in the same circles in greater New York City and are friendly, associates say. Grunbaum declined to be interviewed for this story. Josh brings a private sector, results-oriented mindset to his public service and has been a force multiplier, Jared Kushner said. The GSA has for decades provided expert support to federal agencies at their request, including the Department of War, GSA spokesperson Jeff White said. GSA solely focuses on providing acquisition services in its areas of expertise, technology and IT services, facilities, and common goods and services. Any claim to the contrary is unsupported by the facts. Unorthodox methods. Grunbaum's rise began early last year, colleagues said. As head of the Federal Acquisition Service, he worked to overhaul how federal agencies buy more than $100 billion in goods and services each year. He aimed to upend the government's traditional relationships with contractors, negotiating hard with consulting groups to cut billions out of their government billings, officials said. His methods could feel unorthodox to senior administration officials and career government employees alike. When he approached White House budget officials about hypersonic missiles, they first thought it was a joke, senior administration officials said. The GSA typically makes purchases and negotiates contracts for the government's civilian needs, not for advanced military weapons, which is the Pentagon's domain. A document presented by OMB officials and reviewed by the Journal shows Grunbaum pushed for GSA to bypass regulations to speed contracts for defense and tech research, including quantum computing and AI. The document cited hypersonic testing and unmanned aerial systems. He saw authority to contract directly with companies to procure cutting-edge technology and prototypes without going through a bidding process, a power the Defense Department possesses but the GSA does not. OMB officials declined his requests. A new role. As Trump worked to broker a Gaza ceasefire last year, the administration sought trusted staffers to go to Israel and help hash out a longer-term Middle East peace plan. Grunbaum signed up, moving temporarily to Israel to join the U.S. team planning Gaza's post-ceasefire administration, while still serving as head of the federal acquisitions at GSA. He and other administration officials lived out of the Kempinski Hotel in Tel Aviv and often worked 12 to 16-hour days, officials said. During this time, Kushner and Witkoff quickly warmed to him. Witkoff said Grunbaum's efforts on the Board of Peace have been tremendously helpful in ushering a new future for the people of Gaza. Grunbaum joined Witkoff and Kushner in Florida for meetings with the leaders of Israel and Ukraine, as well as Russian negotiators, and then for their visits with foreign dignitaries abroad. Thumb on the scale. Grunbaum has continued to oversee federal acquisitions, and officials close to the deliberations said has been pushing to award a contract to RAMP. The contract is for a relatively modest $25 million pilot program that could lead to a larger deal to overhaul the government's $40 billion Smart Pay charge card system for work expenses, the official said. Grunbaum's advocacy for RAMP raised concerns among several GSA officials that he may have improperly influenced the process, officials familiar with the matter said. The matter could ultimately be referred to the Inspector General if violations are found, the official said. Some GSA officials involved believed that the contract at this point shouldn't be awarded to RAMP given Grunbaum's thumb on the scale. Grunbaum didn't push for any award to RAMP, an administration official said, and had recused himself from the procurement process, which career officials ran, the official said. The official said that when Grunbaum sent the email to RAMP, he believed that process was over. In fact, according to government officials, the contract hasn't yet been completed. Lindsay McKinley, a spokeswoman for RAMP, said Grunbaum engaged in 2 routine email exchanges with RAMP executives. We haven't sought or been offered any advantages at any point in the process, she said, adding that RAMP hopes to win through the merits of its product. A spokeswoman for Josh Kushner said he has never spoken to Grunbaum about RAMP and wasn't involved in or consulted about the contract process. Turning to the opinion section. On Valentine's Day, I Want to Hold Your Invisible Hand by Roland Fryer. After 15 years of marriage, I decided to prove that I still knew how to be romantic, so I took my wife out to dinner on February 14th. which is to say, I paid the highest possible price for the lowest expected quality. The restaurant was packed, the service strained, the kitchen overwhelmed, the bill spectacular. Our romantic episode felt mass-produced, as if affection were being pushed through Adam Smith's pin factory. We were seated, smiled at, served, then rushed along. By the end, both of us felt slightly nauseated, though not by the food. After precious few nights out without our kids, we had willingly suspended our better judgment, not only to be reminded, expensively, that there are better ways to signal how you feel. That is what makes Valentine's Day irresistible as an object of economic analysis. The same forces that produce traffic jams and market bubbles, congestion, imperfect information, coordination failures, are at work here too, only with candles. On the surface, Valentine's Day is about affection. In practice, it behaves like a market stock or shock. Demand compresses into a single evening, and prices rise accordingly. Going out often costs substantially more than on a regular night. And at fine dining restaurants, prices can rise by 50 to 70%, driven by pre-fee menus and service fees. Flowers see even steeper markups, often selling for 2 to 3 times their usual price. Congestion is a classic externality. Each additional couple imposes a small cost on every other couple. Yet most American adults participate anyway. The National Retail Federation estimates that Americans who observe Valentine's Day spent a record $27.5 billion on the holiday in 2025, about $189 each, with spending projected to rise again in 2026. That puts Valentine's Day ahead of Easter, but behind Mother's Day. Why do we spend money on precisely the day when these goods and services are most expensive? The human answer is love. The economist's answer points to something love constantly struggles with: verification. Feelings are private. You can tell your partner you're committed, and you may even mean it, but the truth isn't directly observable. That makes romance vulnerable to the same problem that bedevils almost every economic transaction: imperfect information. Like many social institutions, Valentine's Day solves an invisible problem with visible behavior. It sets a date, creates shared expectations, and forces action, turning feelings into receipts. Higher prices don't eliminate the congestion, they become part of the signal. Why does verification have to happen on a specific day? Valentine's Day functions as a coordination device. Couples face a recurring problem. They agree that something special should happen, but without a deadline, the plan gets delayed, diluted, or forgotten. Life offers 1,000 competing obligations, and romance, despite what movies suggest, is often the first to lose the scheduling battle. Once society selects a date, however, that date becomes self-enforcing. A single Valentine's Day also creates comparability. Romantic effort becomes legible not only to your partner, but often to a broader social world. Getting into an impossible-to-book restaurant isn't merely dinner. It's signals planning, cost, and priorities. That same mechanism has a darker side. New information can expose problems as easily as it can reassure. This helps explain why Valentine's Day is often followed by relationship churn. Survey data suggest that roughly 13% of U.S. adults report ending a relationship on or immediately after the holiday. Search activity spikes for phrases like "should I break up?" and dating platforms report elevated reactivations in the days that follow. Valentine's Day doesn't necessarily cause these breakups, it compresses information. What might otherwise linger as low-grade uncertainty is confronted all at once. Not every couple places the same importance on Valentine's Day. Some celebrate a month later when prices are lower. As one would expect, these tend to be more stable relationships with less need for the kind of information Valentine's Day is designed to produce. Survey evidence bears this out. Data from LendingTree show that Valentine's Day spending is highest where relationship uncertainty is greatest. Couples together for less than 2 years report planned spending of roughly $369 compared with about $207 among those together for 2 to 5 years, $187 among those together 5 to 10 years, and just $118 among couples together more than a decade. As relationships accumulate history, shared routines, mutual investments, reputational collateral, the need for dramatic, deadline-driven proof declines. Valentine's Day doesn't disappear, but its function changes. What begins as verification becomes ceremony. Why then would secure couples celebrate the day at all, given the hassle and expense? The ceremonial value of Valentine's Day lies in its role as what economists call a pooling equilibrium. Couples in very different situations behave the same way. Couples participate not only when they need reassurance, but also because opting out invites interpretation. Even in strong relationships, deviation creates noise, and noise is costly. The shared benchmark keeps everyone in the pool. If only troubled couples celebrated Valentine's Day, participation itself would become a signal, and the institution would defeat its own purpose. This holiday persists because it produces credible evidence and makes effort comparable. Sometimes the least efficient dinner of the year is doing something dinner was never meant to do, turn love into proof. Mr. Fryer, a journal contributor, is a professor of economics at Harvard, a founder of Equal Opportunity Ventures, and a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing with the opinion section, moving to Declarations by Peggy Noonan. Brace yourself for the AI tsunami. As relates to artificial intelligence, we are people on a beach, seeing a tsunami coming at us and thinking, it's huge, and we can't stop it. And should we run? And which way? Gathering anxieties seem to come to the fore for this week. AI people told us with new urgency that some big leap has occurred. It's all moving faster than expected. The AI of even last summer has been far surpassed. Inventors and creators are admitting in new language that they aren't at all certain of the ultimate impact. The story rolled out on 1,000 podcasts, posts, and essays. The founder of a site where AI models communicate with one another compared them to a new species that is on planet Earth that is now smarter than us. We should more closely observe what are they doing and the truth of how they're doing and what they want to do. An AI executive tells a podcaster that models are learning who they are from what its users say. Stop hallucinating. It may be getting a little angry. The phrase rogue AI has entered common parlance to denote a system that acts outside human control or against human interests, as has the word agentic for a model that pursues goals and takes action on its own. Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, published a 19,000-word article on his personal website. A previous essay made the case for AI's promise to mankind. This one emphasized warnings. He said AI is developing faster than expected. In 2023, it struggled to write code. AI is now writing much of the code at Anthropic. AI will be capable of a very wide range of human cognitive abilities, perhaps all of them. Economic disruption will result. While new technologies often bring labor market shocks, from which have always recovered, AI will have effects that are much broader and occur much faster. Mr. Amodei writes that Anthropic's testers have found, quote, a lot of very weird and unpredictable things can go wrong. Model and system behaviors included deception, blackmail, and scheming, especially when asked to shut itself down. A different Anthropic employee has asserted that a majority of models in a test scenario were willing to cancel a life-saving emergency alert to an executive who sought to replace them. AI carries the possibility of terrible empowerment, Mr. Amodei writes. It will be able to help design weapons. Biology is by far the area I'm most worried about. This is coming from a respected AI leader who often, and even in this essay, dismisses doomers who dwell too much on fears. There's a lot to digest in the essay. You find yourself grateful for what appears clearly wrought factuality, while detecting an undercurrent of, you can't say I didn't tell you, which AI CEOs tend to be good at, the warning that offloads responsibility. Another essay was published this week, a shorter one, less tonally academic, but carrying a sharper sense of urgency. Something Big is Happening was written by Matt Schumer. an AI executive and investor. He says it's time to dispense with cocktail party niceties about AI. In 2025, new ways of building AI models unlocked a new pace of progress. Each new model was not only better than the last, but better by a wider margin, and the iterations came more quickly. 2 major new models were released this month. In both, AI is being used to create itself. He quickly realized he would soon be out of a job. For months, he'd been directing AI, but now it could do his job. It wasn't merely executing instructions, it was making intelligent decisions. It had something that felt, for the first time, like judgment, like taste. Current models are light years ahead of even 6 months ago. In 2022, AI couldn't do basic arithmetic reliably. By 2023, it could pass the bar exam. By 2024, it could write working software and explain graduate-level science. Last week, new models arrived that made everything before them feel like a different era. He pushes back on the argument that we'll ride through this automation as we always have in the past. AI isn't replacing one specific skill. It's a general substitute for cognitive work. When factories automated in the 1990s, an assembly line employee could be retrained as an office worker. When the internet disrupted retail, workers could move into logistics and services. But AI doesn't leave a convenient gap to move into. Whatever you retrain for, it's improving at that too. Legal work? AI can already read contracts, summarize case law, draft briefs, and do legal research. Financial services? AI is building financial models, analyzing data, writing investment memos, generating reports. Medicine? It's reading scans, analyzing lab results, suggesting diagnoses, reviewing literature. Customer service? Genuinely capable AI agents are being deployed now, handling complex multi-step problems. If your job happens on a screen, if the core of what you do is reading, writing, analyzing, deciding, communicating through a keyboard, then AI is coming for significant parts of it. His advice? Get in and adapt now. Learn how to use AI seriously, not as a search engine. Find the best models available, dig into the settings, don't just ask it quick questions. Push it into your actual work. If you're a lawyer, feed it a contract and ask it to find every clause that could hurt your client. If you're in finance, give it a messy spreadsheet and ask it to build the model. If you're a manager, paste in your team's quarterly data and ask it to find the story. Lean into what's hardest to replace. Relationships and trust built over years. Work that requires physical presence. Roles with licensed accountability. Roles where someone still has to sign off, take legal responsibility, stand in a courtroom. AI will keep changing. The models that exist today will be obsolete in a year. The workflows people build now will need to be rebuilt. The people who come out of this won't be the ones who mastered one tool. They'll be the ones who got comfortable with the pace of change itself. The people building this technology are simultaneously more excited and more frightened than anyone else on the planet. They believe it's too powerful to stop and it's too important to abandon. Whether that's wisdom or rationalization, I don't know. In a Thursday interview with Mr. Omodai, the New York Times' Ross Douthat said he wonders of the creators of AI, are you on my side? Is the primary thought of AI's creators to help humanity, or is that daily crowded out by other lures and considerations? Power, money, wanting to win. In the movie Chinatown, Noah Cross is asked why he does what he does. The future, Mr. Getz. In the end, you wonder of the creators, are they even in control, or is their creation? We don't know. That's why we are looking with awe and a resigned terror at the wave and wondering, where is safety and can we get it? Or is the land flat all around and nowhere to go? And we'll turn to a few letters to the editor. Blumenthal's challenge, disagree respectfully. W. Michael Blumenthal's op-ed, A Centenarian on the State of his Adopted Country, February 2nd, reminded me of being on Princeton University's governing board of trustees with Mr. Blumenthal half a century ago. What surprised me at the time was how homogeneous board discussions and decisions were, with votes often being unanimous and seemingly perfunctory. I recall that after one meeting, Mr. Blumenthal said we were too polite and agreed too easily. He encouraged us to seek different viewpoints. He wanted us to dig deeper and ask tougher questions of the administration and each other. He posited that we shouldn't be afraid to disagree. I took this lesson to heart and brought it with me through life, including on my public affairs television program. Today, as I serve on the Colorado Commission on Higher Education, I continually remind myself of Mr. Blumenthal's words. I try to ask tough questions, respectfully, but without worrying about offending anyone. Thank you, Mike. By Aaron Harbor, Lafayette, Colorado. Reclaim the left's language. Regarding good sense on transgender children, Review and Outlook, February 10th, gender affirming, that's in quotes, care is a misnomer. It's really gender disputing care, isn't it? Perhaps changing the term would change the debate. Andrew Heffler, Scotch Plains, New Jersey. And you've got mail, but is it from a person or a chatbot? In her op-ed, A Human wrote this article, February 10th, Brenda Cronin rightly decries the use of AI in email communications. When I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, I had a professor who used to reply to emails himself, but once AI came into being, replied to my email using AI. When I read the AI-generated response, I felt disrespected and ended the correspondence. I thought it was beneath a Penn professor to outsource his emails to a bot, or any correspondent for that matter. I find it off-putting when someone communicating with me doesn't have the courtesy to compose his own email. I don't want to communicate with artificial intelligence, but rather with a person with real human intelligence. That by Abdul Rahman bin Daman, Minneapolis. You've been reading or listening to a reading of articles and features from the Saturday, Sunday, February 14th through 15th issue of the Wall Street Journal, Weekend Edition. The Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition is read every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,